You don't have to worry.
Okay, say hello, so let's see if they can hear you.
Just a moment. Good evening, everybody. Good. It seems like you don't hear me.
Good evening. Everybody hears you. Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Ben, you have a, this is Mark Schoenfeld. You have a nice audience. We have about at least 60 people so far, I think. So we're doing well, and we're very eager to hear you.
Well, if you're all waiting, we have to start right away. I wanted to thank the rabbi for inviting me to share some opinions with this distinguished audience. And so I'm sorry to have been delayed a bit. Let me begin with a quick introduction to my background. And by that time, you may have some more people coming in, and we'll pick it up from there. My earliest beginnings were in a little village in Transylvania.
Excuse me, this is very important because he has to take his medication. Okay, so sorry, but this is very important. Have to take it now.
You know why I take this? Because she beat me up?
No, that's not true.
No, it's not true? Wait
No.
a minute.
Okay, take your tea.
Are you able to tilt the computer a little bit so that we can see Professor Ferencz a little bit better? Thank you very much.
There we go.
Is it okay? Better?
Why do you want me to move up a little bit?
No, you were great.
I look great. That's what
Yes.
you're looking at. All
Okay,
right.
is that okay?
Yes, that's
from
perfect.
Pennsylvania.
So before Ben begins, I'll just take a moment to welcome everybody to the ball.
Take more than a moment. I'm still eating my supper.
No. You take your time. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just a quick word here.
Yes.
I want to welcome everybody to the Boston Jewish Society, a Salon Speaker Series. We're thrilled that everybody can join us. Tonight's lecture is extra special as it is co-sponsored by Chabad of Puerto Rico. We'll get to that in a moment. Ben Ferencz needs no introduction. At the young age of 27, Ben Ferencz was appointed the chief prosecutor of the trials, the U.S. chief prosecutor of the Nuremberg Trials. Ever since, Ben Ferencz has become an iconic face of social justice, a warrior on the battlefield of social equity and social justice. Talks that he gave, the prosecutorial remarks that he gave in the courtroom have become, some of the phrases have become staples in courtrooms throughout the world. Humanity's plea to the law, crimes against humanity. Ben Ferencz, his intellectual contribution to the law stamped in every courtroom throughout the world. It gives me great pride as well to introduce my dear older brother, the founder, as I mentioned earlier, tonight's lecture is co-sponsored by Chabad of Puerto Rico. My dear older brother, Rabbi Mendel Zarchi, together with his wife, Rachel Rachi, 25 years ago, moved down to Puerto Rico and transformed Jewish life throughout the Caribbean, starting with Puerto Rico. So before we begin the interview, I would like to turn it over to Reb Mendel.
The interview is going to be given by the presentations by Ben, but it's just a privilege to pay homage to Ben and welcome everyone here as well. And Ben, you lived in a time of great darkness, of great challenge, and no was not an option. You were determined to pursue justice, to restore the light, the glory, the soul of humanity. And as it was mentioned at the young age of 27, and I believe it is mentioned that you had all of the rights to say, no, this is not for me. You had served, you fought in battle, you can go back home and pursue your career, but you knew that at that very moment, to say no and to look away is not an option. And that's an inspiration to all of us as we face the challenges that our lives present to us today. It's convenient at times to either not see it or see it and just say it's not for me. But if there's something that Ben shared with us, is that there are those special moments that no is not an option. And for that, we thank you. In order for there to be light in the world, at times we need to deal with the, the more painful reality that exists out there. And the only way to do that is to sometimes get up on a box at the Nuremberg Trials. Right, Ben? You got up on the box.
Well, if they wanted to see me, I had to stand a little higher.
And he looked them down in the eye, and he said, "I am Ben, an immigrant Jew that was raised by parents that were poor, but I have a soul, and I have a candle that burns, and I can deal with the darkness that you have brought into the world." And with that, I yield the floor and I say thank you for being with us tonight. It's an honor and a privilege.
Moderating, thank you so much, Reb Mendel. Moderating tonight's lecture will be Mr. Mark Schoenfeld. Mark, one of the pillars of Jewish life in Boston, a founding pillar of Chabad Boston. He's our Baal Korah. He reads the Torah perfectly. Every Shabbos gives us great joy to listen to the melodic voice of Mark reading the Torah. Mark is also a senior partner at Burns & Levinson, a law firm here in Boston. Mark?
Thank you, Reb Meir, and thank you, Reb Mendel, for sponsoring this event. And thank you very much to Ben. Ben gave me permission to call him by his first name, which I very much appreciate. And it is an honor and a privilege and a part of history to hear him, the chief U.S. prosecutor at one of the most important Nuremberg trials. So Ben, when you were starting to tell us about your childhood in Transylvania, tell us, if you would, about your childhood. How did you decide to go to law school, and then you went to Harvard? So tell us a little bit about that, please.
My parents were married before they'd seen each other. There had been an arranged marriage by their relatives, which was customary. There was no employment available after the First World War. They had a couple of children soon, and they decided they better look for a better place to live. And so they set sail, on a small boat, which crossed the Atlantic in the middle of the winter, sleeping on the deck. It was third class, of course, because there was no fourth class. We arrived in New York Harbor, sailed past the Statue of Liberty, no place to go. The first night we spent with the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, HIAS, until my mother found a sister who would put us up. And my father was able, despite his knowledge of anything, except he boasted that he could make a pair of boots out of a cow's hide, but nobody told him there were no cows in New York. Nobody wore boots. But so he was happy to get a job as a janitor in a house in West 56th Street, known as Hell's Kitchen. And that's where my memory begins. My father was Orthodox. We were very poor. I went to a public school in New York, in the Bronx, because we had moved there. The 8th grade teacher asked me to bring my parents in. My parents had been divorced, but they had remarried. I came in with my mother, and they said, "You have a gifted boy." We didn't know what she was talking about. Nobody ever gave us any gifts. And she said he should go to college. We didn't know anybody who went to college. But my mother said, "Well, if you think that's what we should do, how do we do that?" And they said, "Well, there's a special high school the only one of its kind in the country, Townsend Harris High School. And if you graduated from there, you would automatically be admitted to City College, and it wouldn't cost anything. Well, that was a bargain price. So we moved from where we were, and I went to Townsend Harris. From there, I went automatically, really, to the College of the City of New York, and which just recently gave me an additional honorary doctor degree in something or other. And that's where I began my education. I realized, because I was very short, I had to be better than most of the big guys who were trying to bully me. And I asked, what's the best law school in the world? Because I realized too that I wanted to be on the side of the law. I grew up in a neighborhood which was noted for its high crime rate, was the highest in the country. And I applied to Harvard Law School. They tested me on my knowledge of criminal law, and they gave me a full scholarship. So I could go to, not only to college, but I could go to law school. And my interest always was in a peaceful and lawful society. By the time I got almost through with Harvard Law School, the war broke out. And the United States had been attacked at Pearl Harbor by Japan. Everybody I knew went down the same day to enlist. I went down the same also to apply. I had trouble getting accepted. The Air Corps, which I was eager to get into, said my feet wouldn't reach the pedals. I said, how about a navigator? They said, tested me on that. And they said, if we told you to bomb Berlin, you'd probably end up in Tokyo. So they wouldn't take me there. And they turned me down on practically all the different branches of the service. But I finally managed to get accepted by the Army. And just by the time I was finishing Harvard Law School. While at Harvard, one of my professors, Sheldon Gluck, his name was, a Jewish professor, decided to write a book on war crimes. And that was a new topic. So he had to hire a research analyst to help him with that. And I'm the one he hired. And the pay wasn't so hot, but I could almost cover the cost of my rent. And so I did all the research there was on war crimes. And so when I tried to get into the Army, they recognized this great talent. So they made me a buck private in the artillery, about which I knew nothing. And I became a member of the 115th AAA Gun Battalion. And in that capacity, we invaded Normandy on D-Day. There was a Jewish captain, a newly appointed captain to this battalion. And he said, Ben, we're not going to need any typists for a while. You wait here and we'll call you. That may have saved my life, because it took maybe 5 or 10 days before I went off to join my unit on the Normandy beach. And there were bodies floating in the water wearing the US uniform, face down. It was still very grim. The tanks had smoke coming out of the turrets of the tank. And my assignment was to try to find my outfit on the head of top of a hill. And I managed to get up there. And one of my old buddies said, Ben, we've been waiting for you. Come on, you take over here. And I suspect there may be some snipers coming out of that farmhouse. So you just take over this 50 caliber machine gun, which I had never fired, of course. And he went off, and I took the machine gun and tried a few shots to see how it was. You could follow the certain every fourth bullet was illuminated. You could see where it was going into the sea. And I figured, well, if the Germans counterattack, which I was supposed to be there to help prevent, I could succeed in repelling them if they came in a rowboat and just came one at a time. Because with my lack of knowledge and the position, it seemed a little bit absurd. And pretty soon, my buddy came back and he was singing, and he had a big bottle of something in his hand. It was, I learned later, Calvados, which has the effect of, I suppose, drinking gasoline or something like that. But he came right up to the edge of the hole, which I was sitting, and I heard a big shot, and he fell down into the ditch. And I turned him over. I thought he'd been shot in the back of the head. And I was happy to see that he wasn't dead. He was just drunk. And that was an introduction to the nature of Army life. It got more interesting, I would say, more difficult, as we traversed over most of France, which was occupied by the Germans, and into Germany. There we were getting reports of all kinds of crimes committed against American flyers who had been shot down and captured by the Germans on the ground. Well, one day, somebody tapped me on my shoulder and said, "Corporal," I was then promoted to a corporal, "you wanted in the headquarters, Patton's headquarters, General Patton." I went to General Patton's headquarters, reported there, directed to the Adjutant General's office, and he said, "We've gotten orders from Washington to set up a war crimes branch." What's a war crime? He had this foggiest idea what a war crime was. They knew about conduct unbecoming a gentleman, they knew about desertion, but about war crimes, they knew nothing. So I said, "Sit down, sir, and I will explain it to you." And I believe I was the first American soldier to deal with the question of war crimes. The earliest reports we got, or what we called, well, I was shortly joined by Private Jack Nowitz. Jack Nowitz was an Orthodox Jew who wrote home to his mother every night in Hebrew. And I thought it would be of interest to this audience. And we were the war crimes branch. And the reports came in saying that Allied flyers had been shot down and were killed by a mob on the ground. I would get into my Jeep, and I got myself transferred to the Jeep driver, and I proceeded to the scene of the crime. And there I rounded up the suspects by finding out who was the burgomaster, who in charge. The terrain, of course, had been already occupied by the American Army. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here to tell the story. And the burgomaster, whoever, what officer I could catch, I'd say, bring in everybody who was in the area of that incident and set them up in a hall, bring pencil and paper, and then I told them to write out exactly what happened. And anybody who lies will be shot. Well, when I told this later to some of the human rights activists, of which I was one, they said, "You didn't really threaten to shoot them, did you?" And I said, "Well, what did you expect me to tell them? If they're not going to get any ice cream, if they lie to me?" This was Germany. I was there. And I knew that I could have a good defense if they accused me of killing helpless civilians, that there was a big sign in the barn hall from the railroad station saying the Jews have to report here by 6 o'clock in the morning or whatever the time was, in the absence of which there'll be a death penalty. I said, if they are threatening a death penalty for not showing up to go get on the train to go get executed, I'm not going to be charged with threatening to kill them if they lie to me about trying to prove the crime. Well, whether I was committing a crime or not was not, never became important. I was never indicted or charged for that. But I began to get the stories. And some of the stories were the usual baloney. For example, we had one fireman, and it was reported from the witnesses that they got the American flyer, had him and were beating him, and the fireman came out and he had a sledgehammer and he hit him on the head and split his head and got splashed with German blood, with the flyer's blood. And he said, that's what I like, splashed with American blood. And I had his name, and I had several witnesses to that small incident. I immediately headed for the address of his home, kicked the door in. The army had already occupied the terrain, of course, otherwise I couldn't be such a heroic guy. And I kicked the door in, said his wife, and said, where is so-and-so? He's not home. He said, get out of the way. I'd go around, search under the bed, in the closet, he wasn't there. I said, do you do his laundry? She said, of course. I said, give me his shirts. I went there, I picked up some of the shirts stained with American blood, held that as evidence, and I left and issued an order to capture him, hold him as a war criminal. I mentioned this a small incident of the nature of my operation at that stage. As things went on, we moved on to something more interesting than the Allied flyer cases, which were all similar. There too, in each case, we had to first locate the body. If you want to prove a case, you have to show that there was a body. And the people knew where he had been buried or thrown into the river. It wasn't too difficult. Sometimes it was difficult. I'd go to the Gestapo headquarters, open their books, and have them tell me what they registered on that day. And they were very nice. They had registered all the names of the soldiers they had killed. And the soldier was only obliged to give them the name, rank, and serial number. And so sometimes all I had was the serial number. And I knew they'd killed four soldiers. And I went out to find the bodies. And sometimes you had to do a lot of searching because they've covered them over. And it was a very grim assignment because first I had to get them out of the ground. Mostly they were already naked by that time, but some of them had their pants on still, and I had to make sure it was the one I had gotten the information in Gestapo headquarters of the serial number. And I look on the inside of their pants lining. Everybody was required to put in an indelible ink his initial and the last 4 digits of his serial number in the Army. And I was able to find the last 4 digits on, this was one incident, they had 3 or 4 soldiers were buried there. And they matched. Good, I've got evidence, I've got the bodies, I've got the record in the Gestapo headquarters, enough to notify the next of kin that the bodies have been found, and I'll take it from there. I mentioned this as a minor detail. This is part of war. I had in one particular incident, I had the four soldiers had been in the ground. I had to pull them out with difficulty. I had invented a technique of putting a rope around both legs and put it on the back of my Jeep and slowly wheel them out of the ground. It was December, it was cold, hard ground, hoping that I'd get more than a foot or a leg. And it's horrible. It's difficult for me to recall, to talk about these gruesome experiences. They were very gruesome. And sometimes, in one case, one of the people I had notified the next of kin, the guy was back home. And they replied to the adjutant general. They stopped me a couple of weeks later today. You know that guy you were talking about being buried there? He's home. How he got home, I don't know. And I have never found out to this day. What was an indication of somebody else's, it was some other American body, that's sure. These are the uncertainties of the technique. Okay, now it gets a little more interesting, if you can call it that. My job was to get into the concentration camps as they were being liberated. Patton's headquarters, the Judge Advocate section there, was notified immediately that there were people coming out of work, looked like work camps, and they all looked like they were starving. They were dressed in rags. The Jews, of course, had to carry a Star of David on them. The communists had a red star of some kind. Usually you couldn't see the rags on them were so torn and old that you could never notice the identification of them. But I would then proceed as quickly as I could to the scenes. The first one was an advanced camp of Buchenwald. And this was American occupied territory when I got there. And the scene, and then I followed that with a series going of other camps. But the scene of these camps was almost uniform. I went to Buchenwald and then to Mauthausen and then to another camp and then another camp. And the idea for me to get in and get out as fast as I could. The scene was also indescribable. Dead bodies all around the ground. And crematoria going, bodies lined up, looking like skeletons and bones, so thin outside the crematoria, and which was still going when I got there. The stench of the burning bodies, the SS fleeing from the camp, and some of the German soldiers fleeing, some of them being caught by the inmates. There were some inmates who were still able to run, mostly Russian prisoners of war, and beaten to death by the inmates. And I saw that too. One case only that I saw, they cooked the SS guard. They beat him up first and put him in on a Guernsey and slid him into the crematorium, warmed him up, took him out again, put him back again, beat him up again, took him out again until he was thoroughly cooked and dead. And that didn't evoke any cheers on my part. It was so grim that it emphasized the horror of war itself. And it, of course, has remained with me. And I was not cheering and saying, oh, hooray, fa. It was a very distressing scene, if you wanted to know my personal reaction to it. Now, when that was over, when the war was over, let me say, I was honorably discharged as a sergeant of infantry and awarded 5 battle stars for having survived the 5 major battles in World War II. That meant going on the beach at Normandy, going through the Maginot Line, going through the Siegfried Line. I crossed the Rhine driving a Jeep over the water on a pontoon bridge, which was a little bit hazardous. You get dumped in the water from the next wave. And I was very happy that the war was over. And I came back to New York looking for a job. I had finished Harvard Law School with honors. And I had no experience. I'd never been in a court because I went right into the Army from school. And I was with about 10 million soldiers looking for a job. And they weren't looking for me, but somehow one day I got a telegram from the Pentagon asking me to come and be interviewed. So I went, and I was interviewed by a Colonel, Mickey Marcus. I mentioned the name because he was a Jewish boy from Brooklyn. And he hired me, or he wanted to hire me. He said, Benny, we need you. I said, during the whole war, you didn't need me. They gave me every filthy job they could think of. They knew I was Jewish. They knew I was a Harvard graduate. They said, clean the toilets, clean them again, clean them again, clean them again. You can do better than that. So I was subjected to attempts at persecution while a soldier in the Army. I mention it because some of the bullies who were bullying me were guys who had a career in the Army. They couldn't get a job. They stayed in the Army, and you get promoted by saying, yes, sir. And I was not a yes, sir type guy. If it was something which I thought was illegal or ridiculous, I didn't do it. So I was in trouble with the Army most of the time. Anyway, Mickey Marcus, in effect, hired me. He said, we'll make you a full colonel. I said, in the Army, I don't go. I don't trust the Army. He said, we'll give you a simulated rank, which I'd never heard of. He said, I said, what does that mean? He said, well, you'll have all the privileges of a soldier, of a colonel's rank. I said, how long do you expect me to sign up? He said, you can quit anytime you like. That was an offer I could hardly refuse. So I called up my girlfriend, as we called them in those days, and she had been waiting patiently while I went up to college and went off to law school. And I said, how would you like to go to Europe for a brief honeymoon? She said, I'd love it. I said, you got it. Well, that's how I proposed. And anyway, I decided I was going to accept the job. And about the same time, I was told by Mickey Marcus, there's another fellow who wants to talk to you, a Colonel Telford Taylor. And I went to see Colonel Taylor, and he explained to me that he'd been appointed by President Truman to set up additional war crimes trials beyond the trial of the International Military Tribunal, which was already just beginning. The International Military Tribunal consisted of the United States, Russia, France, and England. And each of them sent some of their top lawyers as prosecutors and as judges. That was just about beginning at that time. And Taylor was supposed to set up 12 additional trials in order to make sure that we presented a comprehensive picture rather than just a snapshot of some of the big Nazi leaders like Hermann Goering and others like that. And he was recruiting staff for that. So he explained to me that he'd been asked by the president to set up additional trials. He knew about my experience as a war crimes investigator in the Army. And he asked whether I'd be interested in going with him. And he said, but you know, he said, I've been checking up on your record, and I find that you're occasionally insubordinate. I said, that's not correct, sir. I'm not occasionally insubordinate. I'm usually insubordinate. I don't obey orders that I think are illegal or stupid. I said, well, I've been checking up on your record too. And I had. He was also a Harvard Law graduate. And I said, I don't think you'll give me that kind of orders. He smiled. He said, you'll go with me. So he appointed me to go with him, as he said. I went before him. And his job was to set up these 12 trials covering the entire panorama of German life, trials against the doctors, SS doctors, who performed medical experiments on concentration camp inmates, guys in Department of the Justice, lawyers and judges who perverted the law, the industrialists who raised the money for the concentration camps, who set up the slave labor programs and working the Jews to death, and not only Jews, everybody. And they had a whole string of a dozen different trials. And Taylor said, look, we have suspects under arrest now, but in order to set up a trial, of course, we need evidence. And without evidence, you have nothing. And if you don't have a prisoner in captivity, you also have nothing. So we have to match up people who are still alive, who committed major crimes, and against whom we have sufficient evidence to obtain a conviction. And he said, your job, Benny, will be to go and set that up and find that. So I thought to myself, gee whiz, all I want to do is go to Europe for a honeymoon. I'll stay there a couple of months. I'll turn around and come home. And well, it didn't quite work out that way, because my first assignment was to go to Berlin. Berlin had been bombed out. They gave me a broken building where the chairs were all smashed up and everything else. I said, I'm supposed to make an office out of this. I called up, found out who was the commander of the Berlin outfit, and it was General sowieso, I don't remember his name. And I call him up and I say, I'm here on orders of the President of the United States, carrying an order from General somebody or other. I'd like you to come up to my office right away. And he came over, and I had put a picture I had found on the floor of the past president, I don't remember which one it was. I had hanging over on the wall behind me, and a broken desk and a broken chair in front of me. And this colonel came in from Berlin command. And I said, look, I can't work in an office like this. It's a disgrace. I'm trying to do something in a hurry for the United States. And I gave him a chair which had the back legs broken. We could just look up at this picture of the president, and I had scribbled on it to my friend Benny. And he was convinced that, of course, I was a great friend of the president. So he said, yes, sir, yes, sir. And he gave me a part of a building in which General Clay, who was the commanding general for the area, had his offices. So that was it. And then I said, look, I need cars, I need this, I need that. And I sort of took command. Then I settled down to work. Well, I hired a staff of about 50 people, assigned to them the different segments of German life. Some would deal with the industrialist case, some would deal with the foreign ministry, some would deal with the SS themselves, and sent out former German Jewish refugees mostly to comb through the archives in Berlin. I set up the headquarters in Berlin because that's where the German officers were. Comb through for evidence of different crimes in these different categories. And we had assigned a lawyer for each of the categories. And the lawyers were working out of Nuremberg and also collecting information, whatever they could, witnesses and so on, for all these 12 additional trials which were planned. This is in addition to the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg, which were the four powers working together. The subsequent proceedings, as they were called, were conducted by the United States. The French had similar things. The Russians, what they did was unknown, but they certainly didn't let anybody get away from without at least a trial of some kind. So that was the setup. And pretty soon, one of my researchers, a nice boy from Switzerland, came and he said, Ben, he said, look what I found. And he handed me a big loose leaf folder, you know, and he said, look at this, you know, I took a look at it, and it was Ereignismeldungen aus der UdSSR, which translated means situation reports from, nobody could translate the UdSSR. These were special extermination squads whose assignment was to go out and murder without pity or remorse every single Jewish man, woman, and child they could reach. And they were to follow behind the German lines as Germany advanced through Poland, Romania, Hungary, and on into what they wanted to capture, the Crimea and so on. And they were very conveniently just marked these reports were top secret. They had sent them to their headquarters in Berlin. I later got the distribution list. There were 99 copies sent to every single branch of the Nazi hierarchy. All those people who then said, we didn't know anything about it. Baloney, you didn't know about it. Can't you read? And I had the reports every day. Who was the commander? How many Jews and others they killed? Mostly it was Jews. If they thought somebody was a communist official, they killed him too. If they thought it was a gypsy, they killed him too. But mostly it was Jews. It was to carry out their threat to kill all the Jews. And they had made that threat in a conference which took place in a little villa outside of the city of Berlin, known as the Wannsee. The Wannsee is the name of the area, in which some of the top German leaders had met to discuss how do you go about killing all the Jews. And it was called the final solution to the Jewish question, Endlösung der Judenfrage. So I had the minutes of the meeting. And first they did an inventory of how many Jews were there. They told, and the inventory was in the back of the minutes of the meeting. Hungary, Romania, France, Germany, and so on. They totaled about 12 million Jews. And their goal was to eliminate them, kill them all. That was the goal. Signed by all these nice guys. And that, I mentioned this in some detail because that building in which they took place on the Wannsee, which was a villa owned by some prior owner, the SS took it over. List took these pages from the Wannsee conference report and put it under glass so that everybody could walk around the table and read every page of it. And they had pictures of the people who were there at the conference, all these SS guys on the wall. Where they were known to be dead or gone, they'd have a description missing or dead or whatever his date. So that any German or anybody in the world who wants to know authentically, did it really happen? All they have to do is go to Berlin on the Wannsee. I hope it's still there. I had checked it several years ago. And they will see the official German reports on which units killed how many Jews, what their plan was, how many they had planned to kill. And they would discuss, well, we don't want to do all this in Germany because some of the Germans might object to all of this. And we don't want to take too many gypsies because they know you can't trust them, should kill them right away. And they had all kinds of interesting comments. But it was absolutely, that one document alone, if there are any people who doubt that this happened, please go to Berlin and check it out. I'm sure that museum is still being kept alive by the German government. The German government, incidentally, also gave me the highest award for Verdienstkreuz Erste Klasse later. But so there we had the picture of what do you do? And we hadn't planned any trial against the Einsatzgruppen. So I took a little adding machine and I added up these reports. And when I reached 1 million people killed, I selected some documents. I took the next plane down to Nuremberg, where the trials were just ending, run by Jackson and Company. And Telford Taylor, who had been appointed to do the subsequent trials, I reported to him. He was, by that time, promoted to a general. And I said, General, we have to put on a new trial. He said, we can't, because we have, the staff has already been assigned. All the lawyers that we had bought for the subsequent proceedings had already been assigned to their jobs. We don't have any staff for that. And I doubt if the Pentagon is going to approve any additional trials because they're not so happy with what we're doing already. I said, you can't let these guys go. I have in my hand, absolutely, black and white, clear murder, mass murder on an unheard of scale. And you can't say you can't try them. So he said, well, can you do it in addition to your other work? And I said, sure. So he said, okay, you do it. And so it came to pass that I was assigned as the chief prosecutor and was later known as the Einsatzgruppen trial. And I had never been in a courtroom before. I was an honor graduate of the Harvard Law School, true. I knew my stuff, true. I had been a fantastic investigator during the war, true. So it wasn't such a ridiculous appointment. And Telford, who had tested me a little bit before he hired me, she was speaking to me in French. My French was better than his. And so off I went to set up the search for evidence of what the Germans really did and who can you try for it, okay? Well, one of the reports was this report from the Eastern Front, top secret. And this is the one where I had listed over 1 million people killed. And I had the names of the units, I had the time, I had the place, I had the number. And so we agreed we're going to put on a new trial. And this was case number 9 in the Nuremberg Trials. So let me shift the scene now a bit to what happened. I wrote the opening statement, which your chairman here mentioned something of it. And I had 22 defendants. It was limited by the number of seats in the courtroom. We didn't want to have more seats there than against the trial against Goering and Company, the IMT trial it was called. And I had to pick out 22 defendants. Well, they had 3,000 members of the Einsatzgruppen, and every day they went out and murdered Jews. Isn't that nice? And I got to pick out 22. I said, look, you cannot talk about justice. You cannot balance the scales of justice. 3,000 people, Jews killed, and 22 defendants. Every one of the defendants is guilty as hell, and so are all the other members of the Einsatzgruppen. No, you have to be limited to 22. So I picked out the highest ranking and the best educated of the whole list of Einsatzgruppen murderers. I had a number of generals, SS generals. I had some professors. I had a doctor, double doctor, who killed 33,277 Jews in 2 days, according to his reports. So the first problem was, how do I select? Who do I select? I'm limited to 22. Well, and I did what, the best 22 I could find at that time. We didn't have much time to waste. And I made the opening statement explaining. The opening statement was filmed, but the camera didn't start rolling until after I'd gone from the seat to the chair. And so the opening sentence was missing, which I regretted, but I give it to you now. It was, "It is with sorrow and with hope that we here disclose the murder of over 1 million innocent people." Now, the sorrow was for the victims. And the hope was that we could have a more peaceful world as a result of this trial. And that has remained with me. Vengeance is not our goal, I said. The case we present is a plea of humanity to law. And I closed my opening statement saying that the men in the dock were the terrorists who wrote the darkest page in human history. Death was their tool, life was their toy. If these men be immune, then law has lost its meaning and man must live in fear. I rested my case after 2 days. I convicted all 22 defendants. 13 of them were sentenced to death. It was hailed as a great victory. I didn't feel it was a great victory. I didn't look at it that way, really. The day of the trial, the day the trial ended, the staff, I had a staff of no researchers, about 20 people, usually was invited by the chief prosecutor to have a celebration in his home. I had such a splitting headache that I couldn't go to my own party. I just went home, went to sleep. I mention this because the impulse to say, hurrah, boy, we really killed him. That's a kid, boy, that's great. I had no such feeling. As the chief judge was Judge Michael Bismano, Court of Pennsylvania. He was a rather flamboyant guy, really, but I didn't get to like him until after I got his judgment. My thinking was, as they came back after the trial, and they said, for the crimes of which you've been convicted, this tribunal sentences you to death by hanging. And the courtroom is such as a little lift, an elevator which comes from the basement down below, which is a prison, brings it up, person up to the court, sliding doors open, and he steps out, bows to the court, and puts on earphones and listens to the judge saying, for the crimes of which you have been convicted, this court sentences you to death by hanging. Next. Off. Death by hanging. Off. Death by hanging, death by hanging, death by hanging. Well, it was exhausting. You want to know, weren't you celebrating? I was not celebrating. Why was I not celebrating? I don't know. It just seemed to me, I don't know, is the answer to the question. I could see a human being. Now I'll come to a point which was mentioned in the introduction to me here. All of the defendants pleaded not guilty, without exception. Nistrulig, not guilty. And during the course of the trial, they explained that they were under orders from Hitler and they were at their grandmother's funeral or some alibi, which was cooked up nonsense, because I had a staff of investigators who checked everything. And I never talk privately to any one of the defendants. I said, I'll see them in the courtroom. That's all I want to talk to them about. And, but my investigators were all former German refugees, largely Jewish refugees. My instruction was, I want to know what they did from the moment they were born. Just go to their house, rip up the floor if you have to, rip up the ceiling. I want to know where that guy was and what he did during these years of this trial. And he did, and I had good reports. So I knew all about the background of these guys. And I didn't see any reason why I should talk to them other than in the courtroom. And that's all I ever did, except with one exception, after they were sentenced to death. And let me take a minute to describe that to you too. My lead defendant was a handsome, fairly young man, a general in the SS. He was fairly honest. When asked, do you admit that your unit, according to your reports, killed 90,000 Jews? He said, I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? That's your report, isn't it? It's top secret to your headquarters. You're lying to your headquarters? He said, no. He said, the men very often like to brag about the amount they killed. So they exaggerated it. So would you say 70,000, 80,000? Yeah, that's more like it. That was interesting because these are the guys who said, "Oh, I would never do a thing like that." You know, "Oh no, I was forced to do it," or something baloney like that. They bragged about the body count. They exaggerated the body count in order to hope of getting them off a promotion. All right, so this is the, and they were picked on the basis of their education. Several of them had doctor's degrees. One of them had 2 doctorate degrees, Dr. Rush. He killed over 30,000 Jews. So the mentality of the mass murderers, I'll take a minute on that. I never talked to any of the murderers until I saw them in the courtroom. There was no fraternization of any kind. I didn't say good morning or nothing. But when they were sentenced to death, I knew Ollendorf had been honest in his argumentation. He had said we had to do it in self-defense. So where do you come off with self-defense? Nobody attacked Germany. Germany attacked France, Belgium, Holland, Scandinavian countries. Where do you come off with self-defense? He said, well, I knew that Hitler had been, according to what Hitler told me, and I couldn't challenge him, he knew more information than I had, that the Russians planned to attack us. And therefore, we had to strike first. Otherwise, we'd be overrun by the communists. And so what I did was in self-defense from my fatherland. Well, I didn't think that was a very persuasive argument to explain why he killed 90,000 Jews. But recently, I was reminded of that when the President of the United States, the current president, Donald Trump, in his first address to the United Nations, which I heard on television, watched it. I usually attended all of those first meetings of Americans with the United Nations. And he said, I want to talk to North Korea. If you threaten us or our allies, we will totally annihilate you, your country. I thought to myself, Mr. President, how do you totally annihilate a whole country? Do you line up all the people and shoot them one at a time, as the SS did? Is that how you annihilate them? And what kind of an argument is that? Preemptive self-defense. That's the argument which Ollendorf had made on his case. He had said, look, we had to stop the communists, so we struck first. And I dealt with that argument, my legal arguments with the court, and the court held that's not a legal basis. It's a ridiculous basis. It's dangerous completely. So if you think you have a neighbor's going to attack you, you're going and you kill him and you kill his mother and his friends and everybody else around him. That's no way of running a country or a world. So the United States was making, the president of the United States was making the same argument that Ollendorf had made in his defense of what he had done. Ollendorf was sentenced to death by hanging. I was sure he was going to hang. The only defendant I ever went to talk to privately, man to man, was to Ollendorf after he was sentenced to death. I went down to the death house, which is under the courtroom. They have cells, but each one has a little window in front and the window opens. And I said, Herr Ollendorf, kann ich für Sie etwas tun? Can I do something for you? And he said, he began right away and he said, you'll know Hitler was right. Hitler had known that they were going to attack. Therefore, it was obliged my part as a loyal German to preempt that and strike first. And so that's what I did. And he began to try to explain the defense which he had made on the trial, which had been dealt with by the court. I slammed the door shut in his face. After about 2 minutes, I said, goodbye, Mr. Ollendorf, in English, and left. I was invited to go to the hanging. I didn't go. But they did send me a film of the hanging of Otto Ollendorf and 13 others. And they medical certificates saying that after 8 minutes, they were dead, each one. I don't know what I've done with that film, but I probably gave it to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. Anyway, so much for my the Nuremberg war crimes trial. It left, of course, a tremendous impression on me, not only the horrors of war itself, but the whole proceeding. And here was a guy who was, I'm sure, a good father. He had 5 children. That was one of the reasons I went to see him too. I thought he might want to send an apology or something to his wife or his children. He expressed a point of view which existed in Germany and still exists, I'm sure, in many parts of the world. And the President of the United States, when he addressed the United Nations General Assembly at that first meeting, he said to the head of Korea, if we think you are going to threaten us or our allies, we will totally destroy you. I thought to myself, what is he talking about? Totally destroy a country? Have you used an atomic bomb? Or you do what we can do today, use a nuclear cyberspace weapon, which will contaminate the whole city or the whole country, cut off the electrical grid on the country. Is that what you're talking about? And it seemed to me such a horrible, horrible way to conduct a country or a nation or a world that it reinforced my previous determination of trying to do whatever I could to prevent it from happening again. It was part of not only the sorrow, but the hope that my trial would serve to move in that direction. And the court did accept my argumentation and part of the judgment that what was done were crimes against humanity and could not be tolerated in any lawful society. And I have been working on that ever since. And I just passed my 100th birthday not long ago. Then I was 27 years old. It was my first case. And I haven't changed my mind. I have written many books, hundreds of articles. I don't know how many hundreds of lectures, all of which is free. If you look at my website, which is my name, www.benferenz.org, you'll see it all there. Now other people are writing books about it. They're coming out now quite quickly. There's a 700-page book, came out in half German and half English, which traced all my activities, including getting compensation for the victims of Nazi crimes, which was what I did when the trials were over. I said, okay, now we nailed some of the killers, a sampling only. What about the victims? And I had always thought of what about the victims? And so I set up various organizations. The first one was the Jewish Restitution Successor Organization. Restitution Successor meant that if the Jews had all been killed and there were no heirs to the property, I could claim it on behalf of the JRSO, as we called it, and use the money for the benefit of the victims who survived. I thought that was a good idea. I called my wife before I accepted that appointment to set up such an occupation. I called her up and I said, what do you think about that? Well, we were living in Frankfurt in Germany at the time. We already had a couple of kids. We had 4 eventually. And she said, well, I wanted to go home, but she was also a refugee girl from Hungary. She said, well, it'll probably only take a year. So it's a good cause and you can do it. And she said, how long do they expect you to do it? I said, they wanted a commitment of 2 years. She said, well, I know you'll do it in a year, so we'll stay another year. so we stayed. And I went off into a career very closely connected with the crimes committed, because it was designed to get some measure of compensation to all the victims, Jews and non-Jews alike, to be paid by the German government in one form or another. And it had never happened in human history before, which I've tracked the history, that a defeated nation would pay individual compensation to the survivors of an illegal war. And that is my proudest achievement, about which very little is known, and I don't care about that. So I launched that one, the Jewish Restitution Success Organization. And then the Claims Conference is another organization which was set up by Dr. Nahum Goldman, who was then president of the World Jewish Congress, to convene a meeting to deal with an invitation he had. It was practically an invitation, not to him personally, but the German Chancellor, Konrad Adenauer, devout Catholic, had announced in 1952, when he was Chancellor, that terrible crimes had been committed in the name of the German people, and that imposed an obligation to try to make amends. This was the first time we had heard anybody in Germany say, acknowledging what happened was a terrible crime. And the Jewish response was organized by the World Jewish Congress, Nahum Goldman, and he called together a whole group of leading Jewish organizations, different parts of the world, as the World Jewish Congress had the connections all around, and the state of Israel as well. And we met in the hotel in New York to discuss how do you do this. Since I was the expert in the field, being the only one in the world who had ever done anything in connection with this, I was, of course, invited to serve as counsel. And we decided, first, an early decision was that we would not ask for compensation for loss of life. We didn't want to get into a situation where somebody said, well, my grandpa was worth more than my grandma, or than my aunt or my tante, or something like that. And we cannot measure the value of a human life. If he suffered injury to his health, loss of wages for his family, that we can measure. And we will measure any other damages, like an insurance claim, which you could prove by. And so we set up, I say we, I mean I set up. I was the first employee. So I named myself the Director General of the Jewish Restitution Success Organization, because I figured the Germans would be very impressed with the Director and the General. I was the first, the only employee at the time. When I began to set up a big staff to do that, which was an impossible operation, really, because I had about 3 or 4 months of a deadline of a law passed by the United States military government, saying that all the claims had to be filed by the end of the year. And there were only a few months' time in that. And so I went to see General Clay, who was then the commanding, Lucius Clay, who was then the commander of US forces in Germany, occupied Germany then. And I said, General, I've got this assignment, but I've only got a few months in which to do it. I can't locate all the stolen Jewish property taken from the Jews in that period of time. I need an extension of the law. He said, I can't give you an extension of the law. I said, why not? He said, because the Russians are breathing down my neck, and I don't know when they're going to come in here. So I just don't want any extension. I said, well, look, I have to do that. I need money in order to see if I can get that done in time. He said, okay, whatever it is, you go down and talk to so-and-so, the finance guy, tell him I okayed it, and get going. So I went down to see the finance guy, and I said, I just came from the general. And he says, we're putting on a high-speed program of restitution here. I need money. Take it from occupation funds, and we'll repay it. When the money comes in, we'll take care of it. He said, do you think I can do that legally? I said, well, I have a memo in my pocket says you can. He said, okay. I told the same thing to John Clay. I said, okay, neither of them. They knew me from my Nuremberg prosecuting days. And so I took $1 million marks to start with. I went out, seized about 24 US military vehicles, put people, sent them searching all over Germany, every real estate registry. I said, if it's a Jewish looking name, we claim it. And a day before the filing deadline, I called up General Clay. I said, I don't need an extension. We claimed everything. And we claimed 163,000 pieces of property in Germany. If anything with a Jewish name, we claimed it. If it turned out to be like some of the German leaders, same had a Jewish name, we had to withdraw the claim. But that's the way that happened. And nobody knows about that really, just as well. But anyway, as a result of that, everybody who had owned property in Germany or business in Germany was able to obtain the return of the property. An aside which may be too detailed, but it was mission impossible because Germany had currency reform. The Deutsche Reichsmark was worthless. You could be a millionaire in Reichsmarks, you couldn't buy a loaf of bread. So the Germans changed the currency. Watch out, the United States, you may have similar problems soon. They said, we issue a new currency. The Reichsmark is finished, but for every Reichsmark, you get 1 Deutsche Mark. So with the Deutsche Mark, you could buy bread, you could do anything. That was the new currency issued. But a man who had received 100,000 Reichsmark for his property from even a good German, a neighbor who tried to help him. He knew the German Nazis were coming and the Jews couldn't own property. Somebody who had bought his property for 100,000 Reichsmarks was now entitled to get back 10,000 Reichsmarks. They didn't want to understand the currency reform problems. So when I filed a claim, I offered 10,000 Reichsmarks to the one who had been the owner at that time of the property. They said, well, I gave 100,000. You want to give me back 10,000? I said, yeah, that's the law. Oh, Hitler should have killed you too. So I was generating more anti-Semitism in Germany, which had enough to begin with. They didn't need any fanning of the flame. But I pointed out we had a court of restitution appeals, that where should the burden lie? With the victim or with the perpetrator? Somebody has to bear the risk of currency reform. And so it has between the Nazi victim and it may have been a Nazi or a non-Nazi German who took over the property. I said, you must first protect the victim who had nothing, had no chance to influence that. And the court accepted that argument. And they said, that's the law. And then I had all this fun in Germany. I don't mean fun, really. I was generating a lot more anti-Semitism. And it was not doing anybody any good. So I devised a scheme to offer to each of the state governments. I said, you take over the claims. You give me a sum of money now. You can take into account any things you want to do. What's a fair amount to settle a case? Or whatever it is, I want the money now. You take the claim, you do it. And if it takes you a couple of years, so what? You've got time. And if you want to go easy on somebody, it's up to you. And they bought that. And so I sold my claims to each of the state governments. And that enabled me to do several things. First of all, we had money in hand. We needed money now, not when 10 years later, if we litigated property claim. And we got the money now. Israel was desperate for money at the time. They were attacked by all the Arab states. They were at war. And the Jewish organizations weren't going to put any more money into this. So I had to immediately generate enough money to maintain a pretty large staff of people, because we had to set up offices, restitution offices in all the major German cities and all the countries of the world where there were accumulation of Nazi victims. And they needed help with these complicated legal claims had to be filed. So I managed to duck out from under by getting some immediate funds to put into the German coffers. The distribution of those funds was done by the American Joint Distribution Committee, a most respected American Jewish philanthropic organization, and by the State of Israel for the Jews in Israel. So we had the money coming in immediately at the service of the Nazi victims, who of course complained that they didn't get enough, that they were sick, they were this and they were that. And they said to the organizations taking our money, you know, and wasting their time in Germany or whatever excuses they had. In fact, I could hardly support my family on what I was earning. And I brought in about 50 billion marks, or $50 billion before I said it's time for me to go home. And I had been away for about 10 years, taking the early war crimes trials. And so I went home and tried to support my 4 kids born in Nuremberg. And bought a little house in New Rochelle, which is now on the market. And this broadcast is away from home. And I went back home and began the practice of law. I formed a partnership with Telford Taylor, who had the same problem I had. When you went to the big law firms and asked for a job, they said, how many clients can you bring with you? My clients had nothing but a tattoo on their arm. I couldn't bring any business to a big law firm. So Telford Taylor and I formed a little partnership of sorts, and we carried on as best we could. And he died several years later, and he incidentally was married to a Jewish girl, and his first baby was called, I think, Benjamin. And we had a great relationship, and he was a great man and an excellent lawyer, and he's never been properly appreciated. But he then taught at Columbia Law School, and Cardozo Law School is where he ended up finally before he died. Anyway, so there you have a quick view of some of the things related specifically to Jewish interests. But there's a greater Jewish interest also, I think, and that is to prevent war making. Oh, Ben, are you crazy? Prevent war making? I mean, this is something which has been glorified for many years, centuries, and now you want to stop it? Yes, I want to try to stop it. Oh, you're out of your mind. Maybe, but I'm right. Because if we don't put a stop to settling our dispute by killing a bunch of maybe innocent people, which is what every war does, we may become a dead planet because somebody's going to pull the plug on the cyberspace weapons, and cyberspace will kill us all. And so we have to change our mentality before we can change, try to eliminate war making itself. That is my ultimate goal in life. And I've been doing that all my life, really. From the time I was 28, I guess, I saw the Einsatzgruppen case and what happens in time of war. That we've got to change our way of settling disputes by peaceful means only, as the UN Charter requires. That is ignored. And look at the world we have now. They're killing each other left and right on all parts of the world, in Africa, in Latin America. Oh, everybody's still glorifying war making. I think it's the stupidest thing I can think of. And so I spent my time still lecturing. I'm over 100 years old now, and writing. I've written lots of books. Everything is available on my website, which is my name, benferenz.org. All of it's available. Motion pictures have come out. 3 or 4 new books are now coming out, big books on this whole topic. And I hope it'll do some good. I won't know if I'll be around to ever see it, But I had 3 offices in Israel, for example, Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem, to help the claimants with their claims. And they had offices in every major country where Jews found refuge. And those claims, by now, I hope they're all, pretty much settled. They have provided some measure of help to every survivor, covered Jews and non-Jews alike. And anyway, so I look back on that with some measure of pride in what was done. I have a lot of fan mail coming in saying that, I don't know, I'm a great guy or something like that. I try to acknowledge many of them, but that's it. That's the story of Ben Ferencz and the Jews and Jewish restitution and compensation for Hitler's crimes had never been done before. Now, it's been suggested that I should say something about the mentality of the Germans who did this. I picked the defendants by their education and their rank. And the best expression of the German point of view came from Dr. Otto Ohlendorf, father of 5 children, to whom I talked to privately in the death house in the Nuremberg courthouse. And his explanation is the same explanation made by our current president in the United States, Donald Trump. In his first address to the United Nations, he said, I'm talking to North Korea, and I want to warn them that we will totally destroy them if they threaten South Korea or threaten us or any of our allies. That was his first speech to the United Nations. I thought to myself, man, what are you talking about? You totally destroy a country? Why? Who are you going to kill? Everybody? You're going to go shoot them all down with machine guns? Like the Einsatzgruppen did, they shot 1 shot at a time, thousands of Jewish children, 1 shot at a time. Some of them just slammed their head against a tree. See, what are you talking about? So that's the situation we're in now. And it's a dangerous situation. We still think in terms of using armed force. It's got to disappear, or the people on this planet will disappear. I'm sounding a warning to you that we can no longer use armed force as a means of settling disputes of any kind. And there are many disputes about the boundaries of a country and whether Israel should be take this in or take this one out. They should be settled peacefully by peaceful means, only by the rule of law. That's the only alternative you have. Either you use force or you use law. These are your 2 choices. And the people who say we don't need law, which is now being heralded by the United States, the President of the United States, I saw his executive order last week saying we should in effect, kill the International Criminal Court, which was set up after years of effort. I wrote 2 volumes on the International Criminal Court 30 years ago. And we worked hard to get court so that we would have an instrumentality to deal with the disputes, which leads people to want to kill their neighbor or kill somebody they think threatens them. And if you destroy the legal instruments that you have, and they are weak, they are difficult, there are problems with them, of course. It's a newborn babe, the International Criminal Court in The Hague, which we finally created with the consent of 132 nations who came to Rome for a big conference. I did the opening statement at that conference. And I said there too, the time to do it is here and now. And they did accept a charter to bind all nations equally to maintain a peaceful law order and to hold people accountable for war crimes, which are terrible crimes. And the United States is now seeking to undermine that. And this week, 3 cabinet members, under instructions from President Trump, warned them that they consider them incompetent, corrupt, overpaid, underworked, and all kinds of every conceivable insult to the court and its staff to terrorize them. They won't let them leave the country. They won't let visitors come in. There will be all kinds of restraints on immigration. Outrageous threats to a newly created international criminal court, which has its problems. It doesn't need additional criminals. The United States never joined the court. The United States said the law may apply to you, but not to us. We will take care of our own people. We don't commit crimes. If we commit crime, we should deal with it. Nobody else. We don't trust anybody else. Well, that may sound pretty good, but it doesn't work out quite that way. We do commit crimes, and we don't admit that it's a crime. Other people think it is a crime. The recent event, for example, where they asked the Pentagon, the president ordered the president to get rid of a general who was visiting Iraq, and he was with Iran. He was an Iranian visiting Iraq, with which we had no diplomatic relations. They said they should take him out. Take him out. That was the order given to the army. So, of course, they murdered him. That was taking him out. Hey, that's murder, Mr. President. That's murder, where I come from. And if you believe you have a good case against somebody who should be tried and punished, good, bring him into court. You then send some of your guys out to take him out. I don't care how bad a guy he is. We even put Herman Goering in the trial. He took himself out when he was found guilty. But so we still have a long way to go in recognizing that the rule of law is vital to the survival of this planet. Because with our new technology, most of which I, of course, don't understand, we have the capacity to cut off the electrical grid on this planet. I know that if you don't have electricity, pretty soon you'll all be dead. And if you don't have any water, especially. So we live in a difficult time. And I've spent a long time. I was 27 when I started trying to make history, trying to appeal to the punishment of crimes against humanity, which are still being committed all around the world. And we are making progress. We have a court. We have declarations of human rights supported by the United Nations, but there is no enforcement. So you need laws to define what's permissible, courts to decide whether the laws have been violated, and a system of effective enforcement if you want to have a peaceful world. We have our laws are improved for human rights. We have the beginning of courts. We have the International Court of Justice. We have the International Criminal Court. We have local court. And we have practically no enforcement. So we're sitting on a two-legged stool, and you're liable to end up on your head unless you decide you have to deal with this in a global way for the benefit of all people. We see at this moment struggle in the streets. Policemen are accused of killing people needlessly. Black people are complaining correctly that they're still being discriminated against since the American Civil War. It's not as bad as it was then, but it's still a lot of discrimination against blacks in many ways, and they are protesting it. And so it's gotten into national crisis. What do you do about the police, and what do you do police brutality, and what do you do about brutality in defense of the human rights for Black people? This exists today. I won't be around to see the end of that problem, but I leave it to the young people to see the world as it is. And
Ben, you're just beginning. You're laying the platform for the next 100 years.
I'm laying the platform for the next 10 years, next many years. I hope this is just the beginning.
Do we have time for a question or two or three?
Sure, whatever you like. Whatever you like. You're in charge. Am I finished now?
You tell us.
Well,
Ben, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for bringing justice and peace and sympathy and amity to the world. You've been so inspirational. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you very much. We still have a long way to go.
Yes, sir.
But if you're determined, I hope we can do it before we all destroyed.
Is there anybody who wants to ask a question before we wrap up tonight? Is there anybody with a query for Mr. Ferencz?
I've answered all the questions. That's good.
No, I think you presented the full story. You answered. I got like 4 texts in the middle from various. The question was answered. So you're like the ultimate teacher. You foresee all the questions, and you answer them in your initial go at it.
I hope that they have been persuasive, and that you'll also help to move in the direction of a more humane and peaceful world for everyone.
Amen. Amen. And in that spirit, you know, the prophecy of Isaiah, right? When all the nations of the world will turn their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hoops.
That's correct.
When nation will not lift up sword against nation, and neither will they learn war anymore. So,
quotation on my philosophy.
yes, yes. So it's very much that sort of conception of life and nationhood is very much anchored in the Jewish tradition. So thank you so very much for your brilliance, for your empathy. You learn with your heart, and that has been so true since the first phone call that I made to you. It was very clear that I'm not speaking just to some cerebral specimen. This is a person who is an existential hybrid of heart and mind, and anchored by Yiddishkeit. Remember when you free? My name is Beryl, and my wife's name was may she rest in peace, was Gittel, Gertrude in English.
Yes.
And together you built such a beautiful family. I've been in touch with you, with your son, Professor Donald Ferencz, who's so kind in helping us organize tonight's lecture. So from Chabad of Puerto Rico, Chabad Boston, from Jews all over the world that are joining us, thank you so much for the work that you've been doing for humanity.
I thank you, Rabbi, for the work that you do and for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Be well. Godspeed. Good night. And I look forward to this continued relationship and continue to spreading the message of hope and peace and justice. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Be well. Good night. And good night to everybody else. Good night.
Good night, everyone.